This is Ask a Humanist for August 2013. I was off for the summer because I'm a mom. That's what I do. I take the summer off with my kid. And we're getting back into doing this. And I think you'll notice a little bit more fancy schmancy production values. Not much, but a little bit. Today's Ask a Humanist focuses on secularism and supernaturalism. I've had a lot of questions over the last few months about, explaining secularism to religious people and how do you do it? What role does supernaturalism play, if any, in humanism? So I decided I was going to kind of dedicate a show to this. But first, we have to talk about definitions. What is secularism? What is supernaturalism? First things first. Humanism is a secular philosophy of life that rejects supernaturalism. So these topics are incredibly important. Most of the time I talk about ethics and morality and decision-making and personal responsibility. And those are also very, very important to humanism too, but so is secularism and the rejection of supernaturalism. So let's talk about secularism first. Secularism is the focus on the here and now. And in this way, it's kind of related to supernaturalism. Now, secularism has two basic meanings, but first we have to kind of understand what secular refers to. Secular is the opposite of sacred. So if something is sacred, it means it's super special. It's probably supernatural in origin, and it's considered holy and beyond question. You don't question something that's sacred. It just is. Secularism, on the other hand, is more mundane. It's the day-to-day world. And that's actually what humanism is focused on. We're not concerned about things that are considered sacred. In fact, we don't consider anything sacred. Gets us in trouble from time to time, but we don't consider anything sacred. To us, the proper focus of our thinking is on what is secular, what is mundane, what is ordinary. We are animals. We have to get through our lives. We have to eat food. We have to sleep. We hopefully have to find someone to have sex with and have kids with. Those are our kind of biological imperatives. And so those are the things that a humanist concerns themselves with. And this is not to say that we don't think grand thoughts and that we don't have big ideals, but they're very much based in the ordinary. And I think that's one of the reasons that humanism is such a powerful philosophy, is because we are very well grounded in the here and now, on the very real problems that humans have to deal with. It's one thing if you're concerned about demons and how to appease a god. Those are sacred concerns. And a humanist doesn't spend any time thinking about those things. We're considering about how to put food on the table, how to benefit our community in very real, tangible ways. That's why humanism is a secular philosophy. Now, the other way that secularism gets used is in the body politic, where the proper function of government, if you're a secularist, is that the government's function should be focused on what is secular as opposed to what is sacred. So the U.S. Constitution prohibits our government from being concerned with sacred matters. We have a secular constitution. Our government is set up to help us with secular things, and it leaves the sacred to the individuals and to the churches and to the synagogues and to the religious leaders. It's not that you can't have that in your life, but that's not the proper role of government. Now, some governments are set up to maintain the sacred for the population. The U.S. government is not. It's a secular government. It's set up to maintain the mundane. And that's not as good a word because secular things are not mundane. They're hugely, hugely, hugely important. But you get the idea. Now, this is obviously related to the concept of supernaturalism, because a lot of what is considered sacred is supernatural. And again, someone who's secular or saying I'm a secularist is telling you, I'm not concerned with anything sacred or supernatural. I'm concerned with the day-to-day aspect of living my life. So let's talk about what supernaturalism is, because when you talk about what secularism is, and one of the reasons it's so hard to define, is because it gets caught up in what supernaturalism is and what people understand to be supernatural. One of the very first talks I gave on humanism, I was trying to explain this concept that the humanist is concerned a humanist is concerned with reality, not with non-reality, but reality. And then someone raised their hands and said, but you can pray a hurricane away. That's real. And I had to clarify and say, no, I'm talking about the reality on which we can all agree. and this brings up a really important point about understanding reality and what is real and what isn't real, because the other words for supernatural versus natural is real, supernatural is not real, but there's a lot of people who think what is supernatural is absolutely real. So it's an imprecise thing. But here's the problem we all run into. Theoretically, there's an objective reality out there. The problem is that our ability to understand and verify this subjective reality is very, very difficult, because we're limited to our senses. We're limited to our sight, our smell, our taste, our touch, how we feel things, and also our hearing. And guess where all of those sensory inputs go? They go into the head. And inside my brain and your brain is a big mass of gushy cells that are sitting in a bag of chemicals with electrical impulses talking to one another. So everything you experience is being filtered by this big bag of mush in your head. And as a result, that brain of yours, it takes shortcuts, it takes errors, it filters out information it doesn't think is important. And if it's got incomplete information, it fills it in for you. It's very helpful that way. If something's missing, it'll fill in the blanks for you without you even knowing it's doing it. It's very, very helpful. The problem is that all of those shortcuts and filling in the blanks creates what we call a subjective experience of reality. You as a human being are only capable of subjectively experiencing reality. So what you experience might be real to you, but it might not be real to someone else who has a different subjective experience. For instance, if you hear voices in your head, some people do. That's a very real experience for the person who's hearing the voices, but it's not real for anybody else because they're not experiencing it, even if they're standing right next to the person who's hearing voices. So a person can have a very real subjective experience that does not reflect what is objectively real external to them, external to their body. Right? So you're limited to what you can experience within your body. Now, why this is important to a humanist is this understanding that our brains are flawed and that our experience of reality is subjective, not objective, is that a humanist accepts this limitation and says, I understand my experience is flawed, and I'm going to do my best to correct for that flaw and find out what is, to the best of my ability, objectively true. I'm going to trust my senses, but verify them. And this is where we start getting into the natural-supernatural discussion. To a humanist, there is only the natural. If something exists, if something occurs, it's a natural phenomenon. There is no supernaturalism. If it exists in the natural world. There is no reason to appeal to supernaturalism. For instance, if there are really ghosts, they're not a supernatural phenomenon. They're a natural phenomenon, if they really exist. Gods, if they really exist, are natural phenomenons, or natural beings, not supernatural beings. The only time you have to appeal to supernaturalism is when you don't have proof that what you're talking about exists. Because when we start talking about natural, we're starting to get into the realm of science. And science is one of many tools that help us double check our subjective experience against whether or not it's really occurring. So science is one way to do that, one way to check whether your subjective experience is real or not. And if the thing about naturalism is we're saying that we can objectively check whether our experience is real or not. We can objectively test that to find out whether what we experience is true or not. When someone says you can't test for it because it's supernaturalism, it's supernatural, what they're telling us is that there is no objective way to test for this. And at that point, we think, well, then it's irrelevant to us. Because here's the other reason we're doing this, that we're spending so much time trying to figure out what's real, objectively real versus what's subjectively real, is because the more our subjective understanding of reality matches the objective reality of reality, the more effective our problem solving is going to be, the more effectively we're going to navigate through the world. Like if you were hallucinating that there were cars on the road, or you're driving a car and you hallucinate that your light turned green when it's still red, that's going to have a direct impact on your well-being. And it's not just kind of that extreme situation, dealing with interpersonal relationships. We assume a lot of times what other people are thinking, but that's an assumption. That's a subjective assumption as opposed to objective, what the other person's really thinking and planning to do. So the more your understanding of the world reflects the objective reality of it, the better you're going to be, which is why humanists are so concerned with verifying what's objectively true or not. And as soon as you tell us, we can't tell, this is what you're positing is beyond the realm of objective verification, we now think it's irrelevant to us. Because if it happens, you can objectively test for it. If you can't objectively test, then it's irrelevant. Not that it doesn't happen, but that it doesn't happen in such a way that's helpful to us. So let me kind of give you an example of this. And this is going to get into the next question that Lynn asked me, which is that, how do you explain secularism and the lack of supernaturalism to your religious relatives? And this is how I do it. When I've got a religious person saying, well, why do you reject supernaturalism? Why do you reject spiritualism? Not spirituality, but spiritualism. This is how I describe the humanist viewpoint. Okay, I say, look, if you have a field that needs water, otherwise the crops won't grow and you and your village are going to die. You need this food, therefore you need water on your field. You can pray for rain, which is a supernatural solution to the problem. You can dig a ditch and irrigate the field, which is a natural solution to the problem. Or you can do both. You can pray and irrigate the field. Now, most people are going to do both. They're going to both pray and irrigate the field. But when you ask anybody except the insane, which one of these approaches is more reliable? Like, if you just prayed for rain, are you guaranteed to get water on the field? Or if you just irrigate, are you guaranteed to get water on the field? And the answer is going to be, if you irrigate, you're definitely going to get water on that field. If you pray for rain, you might get water on the field, right? Which is why most people do both. They're praying for rain and they're irrigating their field. And the reason for that is the natural solution to the problem of getting water on your field is the more reliable solution. It has nothing to do with whether or not there's a God or not a God. It has to do with what's going to actually fix your problem. And that's the approach we humanists take, is we want a solution that's actually going to work. And so we're not willing to put time and energy and money into solutions that have a 50-50 chance of working. We want to go with the solution that's going to be 100% sure of working, which is why we reject supernaturalism, why we're focused on what is secular, why we spend so much time trying to figure out what is objectively true. It's because we want to solve our problems. And when you explain this to a religious person, they get it immediately, because you're not rejecting their supernaturalism. You're not telling them they're wrong for believing what they believe. You're just telling them, you can believe anything you want. I'm going to go with the solution that really works. And if you want to do both, that's fine by me. I really don't care. Now, I then usually take this to the next level and I say, now, imagine it's not a field. Imagine it's a sick child. Are you going to pray for a healing, or are you going to take them to a doctor, or are you going to do both? Most people do both. Again, it's just like the field needing water. Most people do both. A humanist doesn't bother with the praying. We just go to the doctor. But there are a very small number of people who don't take their kids to the doctor when they're deathly ill. They pray for them. They just pray for them. And it's not, we have somewhere between 5 and 10 kids who die every year in Florida because of medical neglect brought on by religious beliefs. And even religious people think this sort of neglect on behalf of religion is criminal. It's criminal negligence to do this to your child. Even people of faith believe that's criminally negligent, to allow a child to die instead of taking them to the doctor, because all you're going to do is pray. And when you explain to a religious relative that this is, I'm on the side of secularism, I'm on the side of natural solutions to our problems, I have no problem with the people who do both the natural solution and the supernatural solution as a way to hedge their bets. The only thing that upsets me or gets me annoyed is when people just do the supernatural solution, that they do not take practical steps to save themselves and save the people around them and to help their communities. When all you do is pray. That's the only thing you do. That's what I have a problem with. And in this context, most people understand why humanism at that point is focused on secularism, why it's a practical philosophy, not concerned with supernatural issues at all, is because at the end of the day, we all have to deal with practical matters of living our lives. And that's all a humanist is saying. I'm secular. I'm focused on the practical day-to-day issues of running my life. I'm not going to waste time on something that you can't even prove to me exists, because I have such limited time to begin with to solve my problems. And the more time and energy I put into solving them, the better off I'm going to be. And that's why a humanist focuses on secularism as opposed to the sacred. That's why we're focused on naturalism as opposed to supernaturalism. That's why we reject supernaturalism as a problem-solving technique. It's because it's not very effective. So I hope this helps kind of explain the secularism versus supernaturalism, natural versus supernatural. Humanism is a natural philosophy. There is no such thing, to a humanist, there is no such thing as supernaturalism. Supernaturalism is a cop-out for people who don't have any proof for their beliefs. And you're free to believe whatever you want to believe. Just, we're not going to go with you there unless you have some proof. Some objective proof, because this is what we demand of ourselves. It's not about you. It's not about you. A humanist does this for ourselves because we understand how flawed our subjective experience of reality is, and we're trying to compensate for those subjective flaws by doing our best to be skeptical of our own experience, so that we don't make mistakes in interpreting reality. And this is why we're so skeptical. This is why we view skepticism as a very optimistic activity. It's because it's helping us correct our own thinking so that we can think more effectively and in a more reality-based way. Now, I also had some questions from Nicole Mello, who was doing a paper for her school, and it had to do with supernaturalism and humanism. So she wanted to know, she had several questions. I'm going to try and answer them as best as I can. The first question was, what role does supernaturalism play in humanism, if it plays any role at all? It plays zero role in humanism. We pay no attention to it. The only time we ever even talk about supernaturalism is if someone asks our opinion about it, at which point we will tell you we reject supernaturalism. You want us to pay attention to what you're talking about, come to us with objective information as opposed to your subjective experience. Because I can tell you right now, I know my subjective experience is flawed. Your subjective experience is just as flawed as my subjective experience. So I'm not going to take your subjective experience as proof that something exists. I'm going to take it as proof that you experienced something. But that you experienced something doesn't mean it occurred outside of your brain. Because brains hallucinate. Little known fact. So, and, I've had those experiences too. Don't call me crazy, but don't eat right, things happen. Anyways, so supernaturalism plays zero role in the philosophy and practice of humanism. We reject supernaturalism because it's counterproductive to problem solving. The next question was, are there aspects of traditionally considered supernatural things such as ghosts, monsters, or gods that are present in humanism? And the answer is no. There is no supernatural anything in the philosophy of humanism. If things such as ghosts or monsters and gods exist, they are natural creatures, not supernatural creatures. And the interesting thing about this is that as soon as you say a god is a natural creature and not supernatural, all fear of God is eliminated. It's impossible to be afraid of a natural creature. I mean, you can be afraid of a bear, you can be afraid of a tiger, and perhaps these gods are similarly scary, but at the end of the day, they're a natural creature, if they exist at all. So, are there ghosts? I don't know. No one's proof. Certainly people have ghost experiences. I've had ghost experiences. But I don't know if they were real beyond what was in my head. It was a subjective experience. I don't have any objective verification that what I experienced was anything other than something going on in my own brain. Monsters, it all depends on the monster, I suppose. And it's the same thing with the gods. I'm what they call an agnostic when it comes to gods. I don't know what you're talking about. The word God doesn't mean anything to me. It's a generic term for a class of supernatural beings. And until you tell me which specific God you want me to give you my opinion on, I can't even give you my opinion on the relative likelihood of this creature existing or not. So I'd say no, there are no such things as ghost monsters or gods in the humanist philosophy unless you can prove that they objectively exist beyond what's going on in our brains. Are there special rights to protect against any supernatural creatures in humanism? No. You don't spend any time protecting yourself from demons when you don't think demons exist. So, no, we spend zero time on that. This is, again, humanism is a secular philosophy. We're focused on the here and now practical problems. We don't waste any time on supernatural problems because we don't experience supernatural problems. So we don't have to spend any time on those. Do we believe in the rapture? No. No, we don't. Sorry, another supernatural thing. Don't believe in it. Don't spend any time thinking about it. Not on our radar screen. We're concerned about the here and now aspects of living. Does humanism have any way that you're supposed to act that will determine where your spirit goes after you die? No. Humanists, by and large, I'm going to go with the overwhelming majority of us. I'm not going to say 100% of us because I haven't polled 100% of humanists, but I'm going to go on a limb here and say almost all of us do not believe in the afterlife. Because, again, it's not that we don't believe, it's that we're not counting on it. The likelihood of it existing is really, 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 really small. And it's really hard to be concerned about that when you don't think anything's going to happen to you after you die. Now, one of the reasons I realized I was an atheist was actually about this question of the afterlife. I cannot conceive of what evolutionary benefit a transcendent soul would have. Like, why would humans evolve to have a transcendent soul when there's no evolutionary benefit to having one? Because it doesn't help your body in the here and now. I can see why we might have evolved to believe or to have some experiences of that nature in our head, but I can't conceive of there actually being any benefit to a tangible afterlife. So I personally don't think that there is. So there is, regardless, humanism has no dogma, so there are no rules, first off. And the second thing is most of us don't believe that there is an afterlife anyways. Now, we do have prescriptions on how we think it's beneficial to you to act. And you notice how I phrase that. You don't have to do these things. I do these because I think it benefits me. This is a very selfish thing. I think it benefits me to be a good person. I think it benefits me to be honest with myself first and foremost, because if I'm not honest with myself, I'm hurting myself because I'm setting myself up for failure by believing things that aren't true. So I have to be honest with myself first and foremost. And that kind of translates into being honest with other people. It just becomes a practice. When you do it for you, you end up doing it for other people as well. And the same thing with compassion. I benefit when I'm compassionate with myself, and I benefit by being compassionate with other people in the here and now. I don't need to do these things to secure a place in an afterlife. That consequence is so far removed and so unlikely. I do these things. I am a good person. I strive my hardest to be a good person because of how it benefits me in the here and now. Again, secular, natural, pragmatic. If there is an afterlife, then the way I'm acting, according to most religions, will help me get into whatever that afterlife might be anyways. So I'm not acting in a way that's inconsistent with the prescriptions of other faiths, but I'm not doing it for a reward in the afterlife. I'm doing it because it benefits my life here and now, and not because I have to, or not because I believe there's going to be any supernatural consequence to me, but because it benefits me here and now in a very tangible way. Does humanism recognize any form of reincarnation? No. Same thing with the afterlife. Nope. It doesn't mean that reincarnation doesn't occur. It just means that there's no objective proof that it occurs. And so it's off my radar screen as something I should be concerned about. If someone comes up with objective proof, I'll pay attention to it. Until then, I've got enough things to worry about that I'm not going to spend my time worrying about the reality of reincarnation. Do humanists believe in an afterlife of any kind? Probably not. I mean, you know, my writings should live on after I die. People should remember me for at least a generation or so. But if you think back and you try to remember who your great-great-great-grandfather or your great-great-grandmother were, and those are only 3 generations away, you probably don't even know their names. Unless you do genealogy. But you never met them. They're just names on a piece of paper to you. They're not like your grandparents if you were fortunate enough to meet them. They're not like your parents. They're not like people you actually knew and interacted with. They're abstract concepts as opposed to tangible concepts. So in this way, I think it's egotistical to even want to exist after you die or to be remembered in some way. I think if you contribute significantly to humanity, you will be remembered. There are certainly people throughout history whose names we remember because of their contributions to humanity in their lives. But that's how you gain, you know, an afterlife, is through your deeds, having your deeds be important enough that people besides your family remember you, because your family is only going to remember you for a generation or 2, and after that they're going to forget all about you. They're going to forget all about you. And when you multiply that out, you know, who were your relatives 1,000 years ago? Who were your relatives 2,000 years ago? Who were your relatives at the time of Christ? Who were your relatives when Moses was walking around? You don't know. None of us know, because they've been forgotten. And that's the stark reality that most of us face. We're almost all going to be forgotten. And a humanist is okay with that. I hope this helps. I'm Jennifer Hancock. This was Ask a Humanist for August 2013. And, you know, if you have any questions, ask them of me. I try to do this about once a month and answer people's questions about whatever you have about humanism and the philosophy and how we live. And you can find me on the web. I'm Jen the Humanist. So you found my YouTube page. I'm also on Twitter and on Facebook. I've got a bunch of books out on how to live life happily as a humanist and how to deal with grief and things like that, and an introductory book to humanism that's free if you sign up for my mailing list. I also run a company called Humanist Learning Systems that provides humanist education on a variety of topics, including humanistic business management. So check me out. Bye-bye.